My name is Barbara Weston, and I'm 65 years old. 3 months before my grandson's, my doorbell rang on a Tuesday morning, and standing on my porch was my daughter. The woman who gave up her baby boy 25 years ago and let my husband and me raise him as our own. She had cried the night she left us. She was crying now. For a moment, I honestly believed the tears were for me. I thought the hardest thing my daughter would ever do to this family was leave it. I was wrong. What she slid across my kitchen table 3 weeks later, written on a page torn from my grandson's third-grade notebook, is the reason I'm telling you this story. And what that boy did about it at a backyard dinner, in front of every relative, we have is the reason I can finally tell it with my hands steady. Welcome back to Red Wine Revenge. This channel is where quiet people finally tell the family stories they've carried alone for years. The kind you don't share over coffee. The kind that take 25 years to earn their ending. If stories like this one find you where you live, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe because this one gets worse before it gets right. I taught second grade in Hartwell, Ohio for 33 years. And if that job teaches you anything, it's the difference between a child who is crying and a child who is performing crying. The woman on my porch was 43 years old and she was performing. I hated myself for noticing. Her coat was good, but her shoes were worn down at the heels and her suitcase had an airline tag from 2 flights ago. "Mom," she said, and her voice broke exactly where a voice should break. "Mildred," I said, because I couldn't manage anything else. 25 years, and my body still knew her the way you know a song from high school. Every note before you can decide whether you want to hear it. Frank was out at the hardware store. Philip was an hour and 20 minutes away in Columbus planning a wedding, and every instinct I had said close the door. I want you to understand why I didn't. When your child walks away from you, hope doesn't die. It just goes quiet and moves to a back room, and it sits there for decades paying no rent, waiting for a doorbell. So I stepped aside, and I let her in, and I watched her walk through my living room like an appraiser. And I put the kettle on because that's what my hands knew how to do. She sat at my kitchen table and folded her hands and smiled at me through the tears. "You look wonderful," she said. "How's Philip? I heard he's getting married." Then a beat later, like an afterthought, "And Dad, is Dad well?" She asked about the wedding before she asked about her father. That was the first red flag, and I caught it. It took her exactly 9 minutes to hand me the second. The second red flag came wrapped in an apology. It was a beautiful apology. I'll give her that. She'd clearly practiced it the way my students used to practice book reports with pauses built in. She was sober now, she said. For years, she'd found wellness work. She was almost certified as a life coach. She'd done so much healing, and she had come home because the amends step required it. I have known real remorse. Real remorse stumbles. It forgets its lines and stares at the table. Mildred never once looked at the table. She said she'd been living in Phoenix these last few years. And then 20 minutes later, she mentioned her landlord in Tucson. And when I asked which it was, she laughed and said, "Oh, Mom. The Southwest is all one big parking lot." I smiled, and I refilled her tea, and I wrote Tucson on the grocery pad by the phone when she went to the bathroom because 33 years of grading papers leaves. You with habits. Frank came home at 4 and stopped in the kitchen doorway with his keys still in his hand. My husband is 67 years old, and he ran Weston Heating and Cooling for half his life. And he has exactly one face for a customer who's lying about what broke the furnace. He wore that face all evening. But here's the thing that kept me up that night, staring at the ceiling fan. Mildred knew the wedding was in September. She knew the ceremony would be in our backyard. She knew Emily's name, knew she was a nurse, knew about the little lights Philip wanted strung over the garden. Nobody in this family had spoken to her in 9 years. She hadn't come home to apologize. She'd come home briefed. Now I have to take you back 25 years because the woman at my kitchen table makes no sense without the girl at the door. Mildred was 18 when Philip was born. 18. Unmarried and furious at everyone, mostly at the boy who'd left for basic training and never sent so much as a postcard. Frank and I turned the sewing room into a nursery. We told her, finish school will help families do this. And for 5 months we did do it, except we kept narrowing. I did the 2 in the morning feedings because Mildred had an interview in the morning. The interviews became weekends away. The weekends became a smell of cigarettes on the baby's blanket, money missing from my purse, a car I didn't recognize, idling at the curb at midnight. I didn't wait and wring my hands. I want that on the record. I found a counselor and paid the deposit. I sat her down with a community college catalog. I offered to keep the baby while she got herself steady on the one condition that she call him every Sunday. She agreed on a Tuesday. On Friday, I came downstairs at dawn and she was standing at the door with her suitcase, and the car I didn't recognize was running in the street. She looked at me holding her son. He was 5 months old, warm as bread, that yellow blanket over my shoulder, and I asked her how she could walk away from her own baby. Mildred didn't yell. She was calm the way Frost is calm. You want him, keep him, she said. But be honest with yourself, Mom. He's not a person yet. He's a bill. He's a bill you'll pay forever. Then she was gone. 6 months later, a thick envelope arrived from a law office in Dayton, and my hands shook so hard I cut myself opening it. Inside that envelope was a document called a permanent surrender of parental rights, and my daughter's signature at the bottom of it, round and tidy. The handwriting I'd taped to the refrigerator when she was 7. She had signed away her son the way you'd sign for a package. There was a sticky note on the first page. Her writing again, don't come looking. Tell him whatever you want. I have buried both my parents. I'm telling you that envelope was a funeral with no casket and no neighbors bringing ham. A funeral nobody sends flowers to because the deceased is alive somewhere in Nevada. We did the only thing left to do. We hired a lawyer of our own. And a few weeks after Philip's first birthday, a probate judge in a quiet courtroom asked if we understood the adoption was permanent. And Frank said, "Yes, sir." That's the point. So at 40 years old, I was up nights with a teething baby again. And Frank at 42 was assembling a crib with the same hands that had just paid off half a mortgage. I'm not going to pretend it was a fairy tale. It was diapers and daycare bills and teaching other people's children all day so we could raise our daughter's child at night. And it was the whispering. Hartwell is a good town, but a good town still talks. And the story went around the church potluck like a plate of day-old eggs. What did the Westons do? That their own daughter ran off and gave them her baby. Nice families don't lose a daughter for no reason, so I protected her. I told everyone Mildred had a career out west and we'd offered to raise Philip so she could get on her feet. I told that lie for 25 years. Remember that. It matters later. Here is what Mildred called a bill. A boy who taped a flashlight to his headboard so he could read past bedtime and thought we didn't know. A boy who came in second at the county science fair and shook the winner's hand first before he even looked at us. A boy Frank taught to sweat a copper pipe at 10 years old, who then quietly fixed the drip under Mrs. Kowalski's sink next door and refused her $5. When Philip was 7, a kid at school said something cruel about his mother, the way kids will. He came home and did his homework and ate his supper. And at bedtime, he asked me, "Did my first mom leave because of me?" I said, "No, baby. She left because of things broken inside her long before you." He thought about that the way he thought about everything, slow and all the way through. Then he said, "Okay, you're the one who stayed." 7 years old. He patted my hand like I was the child and he went to sleep and I stood in that hallway a long time. That boy is 25 now. He's a senior fraud analyst at a bank in Columbus. They pay him to catch liars in paperwork, which the Lord has a sense of humor about considering. He's engaged to Emily Carver, a pediatric nurse who laughs with her whole self. And on the second Saturday of September, they were getting married under string lights in our backyard, because Philip said the only aisle he wanted was the yard, where Frank taught him to throw. 25 years we kept that boy safe. When Mildred rang my doorbell that Tuesday in June, we had 3 months left to keep him safe from his own mother. Mildred's first request came at the end of that first week, and it was almost reasonable, which is how the dangerous ones always come dressed. She didn't ask for money, she asked for a seat. "I want to see my son married," she said, standing in my kitchen with her chin up like she was reciting a rite. "I'm his mother. I've changed. You of all people should want this family whole." Frank sat down his coffee cup with a click. "My husband is not a talker. When he spends words, they're counted out like exact change." "No," he said, "you signed a paper. We raised the boy. His wedding is his, and you're not going to make it yours." Mildred cried, and this cry was better than the porch cry. And I felt the old pull anyway, that back room of hope throwing its door open. Because what if 4 years sober was real and this was the one chance? And I was the hard-hearted mother who slammed it. That's the trap for people like me. You spend your whole life being responsible, and someone learns to hand you responsibility for their sins like a coat to hold. But I've learned a few things in 65 years. So I did the one thing she wasn't counting on. That evening, I called Philip and told him everything. The visit, the tears, the wedding request, Tucson and Phoenix, all of it. No secrets, no softening the edges to protect anyone. There was a long quiet on the line, the particular quiet of that boy thinking something all the way through. "Let me think, Grandma," was all he said. Then he didn't call back that night or the next day or the day after that. Philip had never gone 2 days without calling me in his life. On the third day, Philip called and said, "Set it up, Grandma. One lunch you come to." We met at the Blue Willow Diner off the square, a public place with pie, which was Philip's choice and not an accident. Mildred arrived done up like a Sunday. And when Philip stood to greet her, she went in for the embrace and got a handshake. "Look at you," she breathed. "My son, my whole heart, all these years." Philip smiled the pleasant, unreadable smile he uses on people whose loan files don't add up. Then he asked questions, not angry questions, precise ones, in the gentlest voice you ever heard. Where had she lived? Which years? Doing what? Where was her coaching certificate from? What was the amend step exactly? Could she walk him through the steps she'd done? And when I watched my daughter's answers wander from Phoenix to Tucson to Sedona, watched dates slide around like furniture being rearranged in the dark. And I watched my grandson catalog every inch of it, nodding, warm as a bank vault. The crack came at the coffee refill. Philip said, "Mom worried about telling me you were in town." And Mildred's smile stopped being a smile. "She's not your mom, sweetheart," she said, sugar over gravel. "I'm your mom." "She's your grandmother. Words matter." Philip laid his fork down. "You're right. Words matter," he said. "She's the one who came to my games and signed my report cards and sat up when I had pneumonia." I used the word for the person who did the job. He left cash for the check and kissed the top of my head on his way out. The next morning at 7, my phone lit up with a text from Mildred, and the sugar was all gone. "We need to talk about what you owe me," what I owed her. I read that text, standing in my bathrobe, and I want you to know my first feeling wasn't fear. It was recognition. The same drop in my stomach as watching a stormfront finally commit to your county. Over the next week, Mildred's story got a new coat of paint everywhere she told it. She hadn't left her baby, you see. She'd been young and scared, and her parents had pressured her, isolated her, pushed the papers at her when she was barely out of her teens and couldn't afford a lawyer. The word she landed on, testing it in phone calls and coffee shops around town, was coerced. She'd been coerced into signing, and the adoption was probably illegal, and she'd already consulted an attorney who thought she had a case. 25 years of silence reissued as 25 years of exile. Now I was there in that courtroom, and so was a judge, and my daughter was in Nevada by her own choosing with a note on my counter telling me not to come looking. But I've been alive long enough to know that the truth doesn't defend itself. It just stands there like a fence post while somebody paints it. So I acted. That same afternoon, I went to the bedroom closet and opened the fire safe and pulled the folder we'd kept for 25 years. The surrender, the adoption decree, the sticky note in her round handwriting. Every certified copy. I called the lawyer who'd handled the adoption and got a recording. He'd retired to Florida. His office referred me to a family law attorney in Columbus named Susan Kessler, and I told her secretary an abridged version of the whole mess. Kessler got on the line herself and listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. "Bring everything," she said, "and bring your checkbook." Susan Kessler's office looked out over the river in Columbus, and she went through our folder page by page like a woman checking a parachute. Then she took off her glasses. First, the good news. This adoption is a wall, a permanent surrender, a final decree. 24 years back. No court in Ohio is reopening this. Her window to contest closed decades ago. I let out a breath I'd been holding since the doorbell. Now the rest of it, Kessler said. Anyone with a filing fee can sue anyone for anything. She'd lose, but you'd pay to win. 20, maybe 30,000, if she finds a lawyer willing to make noise. And every filing is a public record with your names on it sitting in a small county where everybody reads the docket. And if her real game is the story, not the lawsuit, there's no court for that at all. She can stand on any corner in Hartwell and call herself a stolen mother all day long. She slid the folder back to me. Her weapon isn't a judge, Mrs. Weston. It's a story. Keep records of every contact and don't pay her a dime. Money doesn't end this kind of thing. It feeds it. I've thought about that drive home a lot since. If you've ever had to pay a lawyer just to prove you did nothing wrong, you know that taste in the back of your throat. And if you've ever had to guard your family from your own family, then this channel is your kitchen table. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and hit subscribe, because you already know stories like mine don't stop at a lawyer's door. Mine didn't even stop at my own. I got home and Carol's car was in my driveway, and through the kitchen window, I could see my sister sitting at my table, holding hands with Mildred. My sister Carol is 61 and soft as risen dough, and I love her. And Mildred has been able to play her like a church organ since childhood. Barbara, Carol said that afternoon in my own kitchen. She's your blood. People change. What kind of mother turns her back on a changed child? I asked Carol what exactly had changed other than the story. She didn't have an answer, but people like Carol don't need one. The word blood does all their thinking for them. It also came out later that Carol's Facebook was where my daughter had done her homework before ever ringing my doorbell. The wedding date, the backyard, Emily's bridal shower, all posted with hearts. No sin in that, just an unlocked window. That was the Sunday I understood what Mildred was actually building. She'd started attending First Methodist, my church, 3 Sundays running now, and she cried at exactly the right hymn every time. And afterward, she'd stand on the steps, letting the women of the congregation gather around her like heat around a stove. She never made claims outright, nothing you could correct in public, just soft little installments. How hard it was to come home, how some doors stay closed no matter how you knock. By the 3rd Sunday, I'd heard from 2 different women that Mildred had taken to calling Philip her stolen boy. Stolen in the fellowship hall over percolator coffee to women who had brought me casseroles when he had pneumonia. And here's what I want you to sit with. There was nothing I could do about it. You can't call the police on a hymn. You can't suicide. Every law we have is aimed at the hand, and my daughter worked exclusively in whispers. Frank wanted to stand up in the pews and set the record straight, and I talked him out of it. God forgive me, because I could already hear how it would sound. There goes Barbara Weston shouting at her own homeless daughter in church. The trap wasn't around my ankle. It was around my reputation. The whispers went digital on a Thursday. Mildred posted an essay on Facebook titled "To the Woman Who Kept My Baby." And no, she didn't use my name. She didn't have to. Hartwell has 9,000 people and 1 high school. A town like that can solve a blind item before lunch. The essay had everything. The scared young mother, the papers she barely remembers signing, the wedding she wasn't invited to, the fine Christian family that keeps its door locked against its own flesh. It was shared and shared again, and strangers 3 counties over called us monsters in the comments. And a woman I taught beside for 11 years added a praying hands emoji, which somehow cut deepest of all. Then Mildred started mentioning everywhere she went that a podcast wanted her. Broken Cradles. It tells family separation stories, and she said the host had reached out personally, and she said it the way you'd mention a loaded gun on a table lightly watching your face. The casseroles stopped. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. In Hartwell, the church casserole is currency, and ours dried up inside 2 weeks. At the pharmacy, the pastor's wife studied the cough drops rather than meet my eyes. Frank started doing yard work at dawn so he wouldn't have to wave at neighbors, and my husband has waved at neighbors his whole life. I kept every screenshot and said almost nothing. And the town read my silence however it wanted. Quiet used to be my good manners. Now it was evidence against me. And then that Saturday, Mildred came to the house alone, gentle as rain, and asked if she could look through the box of Philip's baby things. And God help me, in front of Frank with her eyes full. I said yes. I keep Philip's childhood in a cedar box in the hall closet, the hospital bracelet, the yellow blanket, a stack of his old school notebooks. Mildred sat with that box at my kitchen table for half an hour, and for the first 10 minutes I believed her tears because some of them I still think were real. She held the blanket to her face. She traced his crayon name on a notebook cover. Then she wiped her eyes, and it was like watching someone close a car door. One clean click and the softness was gone. Let's be adults about this, she said. She opened Philip's 3rd grade notebook, tore a page out, tore it right along his pencil practice, turned it over, took a pen from her purse, and wrote a number on it and slid it across my table. $85,000. Call it back pay, she said. You got a son out of me, 25 years of him. You think that's free? I looked at the number sitting on my grandson's handwriting and couldn't make my mouth work. So she kept going, patient, almost kind, the way you explain interest to a child. There was a lawsuit ready to file. Coercion, fraud, she had an attorney on it. There was the podcast. And they cry on that show, Mom. The whole country cries. And there was the wedding September, right? In the backyard. Be a shame if the truth showed up in a sundress. I asked her. My voice came out about 100 years old. How she could put a price on her own child. Mildred smiled at me then, and I will hear this until I die. Every mother has a price. I'm just honest about mine. She left the page on the table. It sat there like a burn mark. That night I couldn't sleep. And at 2 a.m, I did something I'd done maybe once a year for 2 decades. I went to the kitchen, took down the flour tin from the top shelf, dug past the scoop, and pulled out a bank passbook in a blue cover with flour in its seams. Nobody knew about it, not even Frank. I'd opened the account the spring after the adoption was final. Deposits every month, whatever a school teacher could spare. Birthday money, tutoring money, the egg money my mother would have called it. Because some stubborn backroom part of me needed a door, I could point to if my daughter ever came home ready to be a person. Rehab, I told myself, a security deposit, community college, a dental bill, a fresh start. 24 years of that came to a little under $17,000, and I used to feel rich every time I wrote the balance in. Now I sat at the same table where the torn notebook page still lay. Passbook in one hand, her price tag in the other, and I heard her voice from 25 years ago. Clear as the ice box, humid exactly who she was on her way out the door, and I'd spent a quarter-century saving up to prove her wrong. I woke Frank at 3:00 in the morning. I put both papers on the quilt and turned on the lamp and told him everything. The account, the number, the sundress threat, all of it. Frank looked at the 2 papers for a long time, and then he took my hand, and I said the sentence I'd been building all night, the one everything afterwards stood on. We are not buying back our family. Deciding it took one sentence, surviving the decision that took the rest of the summer. The certified letter came 11 days later. Law offices of Harmon and Price, heavy cream paper, and inside language with teeth. Our fraudulent procurement of a surrender from a coerced and unrepresented young mother. our decades of concealment, and a pre-litigation settlement opportunity in the amount of $85,000 available for 30 days, after which all remedies including public advocacy would be pursued. Public advocacy, even her threats wore Sunday clothes. Frank read it standing at the mailbox, and I watched from the porch as my husband, a man who once carried a furnace up a flight of basement stairs, put his hand flat against the mailbox post like the ground had shifted. He didn't come in for a while. That evening at supper, he stopped mid-sentence, set his fork down, rubbed his left arm, and said very politely, "Barb, I think something's off." We spent that night at the county hospital. They watched his heart until morning, ran their tests, and by God's grace, it wasn't an attack. The ER doctor called it a warning shot. Stress on a 67-year-old heart, and sent him home with a new pill bottle and firm instructions to avoid exactly the kind of summer we were having. I sat in the passenger seat of our own car in the hospital parking lot and made a decision I'm not proud of. We would not tell Philip, not yet. The boy was 10 weeks from his wedding, tasting cakes, happy, and I'd spent 25 years standing between him and everything Mildred cost this family. I know now that was the wrong call. Not a stupid one, but wrong. And there's a difference. While I was buckling Frank's seat belt, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, Mildred buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. After Frank's night in the hospital, I stopped answering her calls. Silence was self-defense. His cardiologist had said, "Avoid stress the way you'd say avoid the third rail." And every one of her calls was voltage. But here's what I didn't foresee. And what changed everything without my knowing it. A phone call disappears into the air. When I stopped picking up, Mildred started typing. The texts came daily, then twice daily, and without an audience to perform for, her language went from Sunday clothes to bare knuckles. The first of the month, Mom, or this stops being polite. 85 isn't a request, it's a discount, and the one that made me sit down where I stood. Pay by the first or I tell my story at the wedding in front of everyone. Emily's family, too, try me. I did what I'd done my whole career when a parent screamed at me over a report card. I documented, screenshots, dated, filed in a folder, no plan behind it. A woman who kept grade books for 33 years keeps records the way other people breathe. I had no earthly idea those screenshots were worth anything. To me, they were just proof I could reread at 2 in the morning to keep from going soft, because I did go soft once. One night at 3:00 in the morning, a different kind of message came through. No threat in it at all. Do you still have the yellow blanket? That was all. I sat in the dark kitchen with my thumb over the keyboard for 20 minutes. Hope trying to climb up out of its back room one more time. And then I looked at the drawer where I'd put the torn notebook page. I didn't answer. By 9 the next morning, she was back to invoices. In the end, Mildred exposed herself because manipulators can never leave a working seam alone. She found Emily online, my Phillips Emily, and sent her a friend request and a message. There are things about this family you deserve to know before you marry into it. Things they've hidden. Call me. She assumed a bride could be rattled into an alliance. She had never met a pediatric nurse. Emily read it twice, took a screenshot, and handed her phone across the couch to Philip without a word. It was a Tuesday evening. By 8:00, Philip's car was in our driveway, and my grandson came through the kitchen door with a look I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger, inventory. He'd already called Carol from the road, and Carol, bless her leaky heart, had spilled the parts she knew. Now he stood in our kitchen and asked, and I finally opened the drawer. The torn notebook page with her number on it, the letter from Harmon and Price. And on the refrigerator, where I hadn't had the courage to file it away, Frank's discharge summary from the county hospital. Philip read everything without a word. He looked at the discharge paper the longest, and when he turned around, his eyes were wet, and his voice was as level as a spirit level. "You raised me," he said. "You don't get to protect me from my own mother. Not anymore. That job is finished. You did it for 25 years and you did it too well." I started to explain about the wedding, about his happiness. And he shook his head once, gentle and final, and held out his hand. "Grandma," he said, "I need one thing from you tonight. Your phone." Philip sat at our kitchen table with my phone and a legal pad. The same table where she'd torn the page. The same chair, which felt to me like a courtroom being built out of furniture. He read the whole thread top to bottom the way he reads at work. No reaction, one thumbnail moving down the screen. Then he copied out certain lines by hand with dates and squared the pad and looked up. "Grandma, do you know what this is?" I said it was your mother being your mother. "No," he said, "a demand for money tied to a threat to humiliate you and to torpedo a family event unless you pay." Written down, dated from her number in Ohio. That's extortion. It's a crime. It's a crime I watch people commit against banks. Most of them are smart enough not to put it in a text thread. I heard the words, and I have to be honest with you about what I did with them. I flinched. Crime belonged to strangers in courthouse hallways, not to the girl whose bangs I trimmed in this kitchen. "She's still my daughter," I said, and it came out half argument, half apology. And Philip reached across and put his hand over mine and didn't argue. "Then let's find out who your daughter is," he said. "Not who she says she is. I do this for a living. Verify, that's all. May I?" Frank from the doorway in his exact change voice. "Verify." So Philip took 2 personal days off from the bank, and my 65 years of instincts braced themselves. Because the thing about turning over rocks is that you find out what was always under them. Philip started with the scariest thing we had, the letter from Harmon and Price, and he did the simplest thing in the world, the thing fear had kept us from doing. He ignored the phone number printed on the letter and looked up the firm's real office line, and he called it speaker on at our kitchen table. A receptionist answered. He asked to confirm a pending matter regarding Weston. Hold music. Then a partner came on, courteous and puzzled, and said the firm had no client by Mildred's name, no Weston matter, and no letter of that description in their system. There had been, he checked, a single free half-hour consultation months back, after which the firm declined the representation. That was the entire relationship. When Philip read him 2 sentences from our letter, the man's voice dropped its courtesy. If our letterhead was on that, he said, that's a fraud on the firm. Please send a copy and thank you. Philip hung up and laid the letter flat. Look at the margins, he said. The kerning's off. The bar number under the signature belongs to nobody. And this template, I can find it online in 10 minutes. She took 30 minutes of free advice, got told no, downloaded a threat, and dressed it in their letterhead. I sat there while 11 days of terror, the mailbox, the certified slip, Frank's hand on his arm rearranged themselves around one fact. There was no lawsuit. There had never been a lawsuit. She's not represented, Philip said quietly, almost to himself in the voice he probably uses over spreadsheets at midnight. She's improvising. Then he looked up at me. And people who improvise this smoothly, Grandma, have usually had rehearsals. It took Philip one evening on public social media to map the last decade of his birth mother's life, engagement photos, a wellness franchise that came and went, and an ex-fiancé in Mesa, Arizona, whose mother still had a public profile and a long memory. Her name was Ruth Delgado. Philip sent her a message that was almost an apology, and Ruth replied within the hour, and her first sentence took the temperature right out of my kitchen. She did this to us, too. 7 years ago, when Ruth's son ended the engagement, letters had arrived. Demands for $30,000, compensation for years. She claimed the family owed her, threats to tell her story to his employer and his church unless they paid. Ruth mailed us copies, actual paper, and I laid her letters beside the message thread on my phone, and my last illusion packed its bag and left the house. Same bones, same escalation, same schedule, even the same phrase. Back pay sitting in a stranger's letter from 7 years before she ever tore a page from Philip's notebook. This wasn't a broken daughter come home lashing out in pain. This was a script tested and revised, and we were the second staging. And the wound she kept pressing on, a mother's guilt, wasn't even personal. It was just the load-bearing beam of the con. At the bottom of her last envelope, Ruth had written a note in blue ballpoint, and I'd like every grandparent listening to hear it twice. Don't pay. It never ends if you pay. If this story has you holding your phone a little tighter tonight, leave a comment for the grandparents raising grandbabies right now and subscribe, because you'll want to hear how a quiet family answers a loud lie. I saw my daughter once more before the dinner, and I need to tell it straight because it's the one moment of that whole summer I still turn over at night. She caught me in the grocery store parking lot. No audience, no Sunday clothes, tired in the gray afternoon light, and for the first time since the porch, she didn't perform. "You think I wanted this part," she said. "The villain part." She looked past me at nothing. "I was 18, Mom. This town decided what I was before I'd finished being a kid. And you let them keep thinking you were the saint of the story. You know what it's like seeing pictures of him. Every year he got taller was proof I was exactly what everybody said I was at 18. So fine. If I'm the monster eats." For 1 second, and I mean this one full second, I saw her, the girl with the bangs. The kid who slept with the yellow blanket herself, once in a crib Frank built the first time. Grief doesn't excuse a single thing she did. But I'd be lying to you if I said there was no person inside the con. And the person was my fault, at least a little. And both of those things are true at once, and nobody warns you. You'll have to hold them at the same time. Then I watched her put the mask back on. Actually watched it like shrugging into a coat. 85,000, she said, backing away. Or I stand up at that wedding, Mom, in front of everyone. You know I will. She got into her car. Hope and Evidence were done sharing a house. I had to pick. That Sunday, the family split 3 ways at my kitchen table. Carol, wringing a dish towel, wanted us to pay something, Barbara. Whatever makes her go away for peace. Frank wanted a restraining order and a locked gate, and his new pill bottle sat on the lazy Susan like a fourth opinion, and Philip folded his hands and waited for quiet. And then laid out the strangest battle plan I ever heard in the calmest voice at the table. "We invite her," he said. "The family dinner before the wedding. She's been demanding a seat at this family's table all summer. Give her one. Let her stand up in front of everyone and say every single thing she wants to say. And when she's finished, I'll answer her, not with a speech, with paper." Carol said that was cruel. Philip shook his head slowly. "Cruel is a trap, Aunt Carol. A trap is when you don't know what's waiting. She'll know exactly what this dinner is. A table with the whole family at it, which is the thing she keeps saying she wants. She'll come anyway because she thinks the story always wins in a room full of relatives." He turned to me, and his voice went young for a moment just for me. "But it only works clean if we stop hiding things, Grandma. All of it comes into the light. The surrender, the note, the texts, Frank's night at the hospital. No more cover stories, not even the kind ones. And there it was. The bill for my 25 years of kind lies, come due at my own kitchen table. The first payment was the truth, and I had to deliver it personally. On Tuesday, I sat in Pastor Neil Brandt's office with my hands in my lap, and I told the truth for the first time in 25 years. Not the story, the truth. The suitcase at dawn and the car idling in the street. The surrender papers with her round signature and the sticky note. "Don't come looking. Tell him whatever you want." The $2,000 for a rehab in Dayton. She left before the first week was out when Philip was 9. The lie about a career out west, which I invented on the church steps one Sunday, and then fed and watered for a quarter of a century, because it kept her dignity and mine in the same clean envelope. I wasn't protecting Mildred, I told him, and saying it out loud cost more than the lawyer had. I was protecting the version of me that didn't fail her. Pastor Neil was quiet a moment. Then he said that, in his experience, the truth arrives like a plow, hard on the ground, but it's the only thing that gets a field ready. Wednesday, I told Carol all of it at her kitchen table. And my sister cried into the same dish towel and said the thing that let me forgive her wobble. I wasn't defending her, Barbara. I was defending a story. I never checked who was in it. By Thursday, I could feel the change in the air at the pharmacy. The town had 2 stories now and didn't know where to stand, and that was fine. Standing there in the open, out of ammunition for anyone, I finally understood what I'd handed away all those years by keeping her secrets. There was nothing left for Mildred to expose. The only thing left to happen to this family was the truth. Friday evening, I handed Philip my phone, passcode, screenshots, the whole summer of her, and my thumb hovered over his palm for a second before I let it go. Because handing it over meant this was real, and there'd be no quiet way back. Philip closed his hand around it and looked at me the way he did at 7 in the hallway light. "You stayed for me for 25 years, he said. "Sunday, all you have to do is stay at the table." The invitation went out that night, plain as bread. Family dinner, our backyard, Sunday at 5, 2 weeks before the wedding. "Mildred, you are welcome to join us. The whole family will be there." Her reply landed inside 1 minute, and I'll never forget the sound of it arriving, that cheerful little chime while Frank was locking the back door. "Finally, have my check ready." I want you to notice, like I had to, that a woman who said she wants her family back replied to a dinner invitation with a payment instruction. And part of me, the backroom part, still noticed the other thing, too, the awful stubborn thing, which is that she was coming. That after everything, my daughter would be at my table again, and some old machinery in my chest began setting it with an extra place. Hope is not smart, it's just durable. Then 2 days before the dinner, Broken Cradles released a 30-second teaser for an upcoming episode, and Hartwell heard my daughter's recorded voice over sad piano music, saying, "2 years they've had my son. Sunday they'll finally make it right." She'd already sold the ending. All we had to do was change it. Sunday came in gold and green, the way the tail end of August does in Ohio when it wants to break your heart. We set the long tables under the maple, and Frank strung the wedding lights 2 weeks early. "No sense letting a good sky go to waste," he said, but I knew what he was doing. He was claiming the yard before she could. By 5:00, there were more than 24 of us, Frank's brothers and their wives, cousins down from Toledo, Carol, Emily, and her parents, Pastor Neil saying grace over the corn. Philip sat at my right hand with a leather folder under his chair, and he ate his supper like a man with nothing planned. Mildred arrived at 5:40, timed for maximum door turning, in a pale flower print dress you'd wear to a parole hearing, soft and wounded and camera ready. She hugged relatives who didn't hug back, and she waited, patient as a spider in a web of string lights, until dessert, until the lull when the coffee was poured. Then she stood and dinged her glass with a spoon. "I want to thank this family for finally making room for me," she began, voice trembling right on schedule, and she gave the speech. The whole teaser, feature length, 18 and terrified, papers pushed in front of a scared girl, decades of locked doors, a mother's love that never once stopped reaching, and now hand to her chest. No lawsuits, no anger. I'm only asking this family to do what's right before my son's wedding to make it right. I watched it land. I watched 2 of Frank's sisters-in-law tilt their heads at that gentle angle, and a cousin's eyes fill, and I felt the whole table lean toward her story like plants toward a window. And my hands were ice around my coffee cup. Beside me, without hurry, Philip folded his napkin and stood up. "Since we're doing family business at dinner," Philip said, pleasant as a teller's window, "I have a few things, too." He opened the leather folder and took out a small stack of pages, and he did the thing. I will remember all my days. He read her own words to the family, 1 page at a time, and after each page, he set it face up in the middle of the table like a place card. August the 1st. From Mildred's number to my grandmother's phone. "The 1st of the month, Mom, or this stops being polite." Page down, August the 6th. 85 isn't a request, it's a discount. Page down, August 11th. Pay by the 1st, or I tell my story at the wedding in front of everyone. Emily's family, too. Try me. Page down. And this time, the sound it made in the silence was like something heavy closing far away. Nobody at that table was leaning toward her anymore. And my personal favorite, Philip said without raising his voice from the afternoon, she priced this family out on a page of my third-grade homework. Every mother has a price. I'm just honest about mine. He looked up. You wrote that one down yourself, so I didn't have to. Mildred's chair scraped. Those are out of context. She started, and Philip nodded like a man agreeing about the weather. You're right. Context matters. Here's some. He lifted the cream-colored letter. Harmon and Price, who this letter says, are suing us. I called them on speaker from that kitchen. He pointed at the window. They've never represented you. Half an hour of free advice and a no. That's your whole case file. The bar number under this signature doesn't exist. You don't have a lawyer, Mildred. You have a template. A cousin whispered something. Emily's mother put down her fork. And then, Philip said, turning one last tab in the folder, there's Arizona. 7 years ago in Mesa, Arizona, Philip said, a woman named Ruth Delgado started getting letters. He laid Ruth's photocopies beside the texts, and even from 3 seats away, you could see it. The way you can see a family resemblance across a room. $30,000. Or she tells her story to her ex-fiancé's church and his employer. Same escalation, same deadlines, same phrase, back pay. That one's in our letters, too. She mailed us everything, and she asked me to pass along one message. It never ends if you pay. He squared the stack. One more thing, and then I'm done. The story you just heard was a scared girl who never stopped reaching for a locked door. My grandparents paid $2,000 for a rehab program she left within the week. There are cashed checks, birthday money, gas money, a security deposit in Reno, the last one 9 years ago. Everyone endorsed. The door was never locked. It was propped open with money, and only one person ever walked through it, and she built us on my own homework for the privilege. The garden had gone so quiet, I could hear the string lights tick against the maple leaves and Mildred's face. I watched the mass crack, one heartbeat where her eyes went to mine, just her eyes. The 18-year-old flashing up under all that scaffolding like a face under lake ice. Then it was gone. She straightened and she played the only card she had left, and she played it at me, Mom. Her voice went soft and the softness had hooks in it. Look at me. Whatever he thinks he's proving, I'm your daughter, your only child. If you let them do this to me, I will disappear. And this time it's forever and you'll die wondering. Is that what you want? Them or me? Mom, choose. And every face at that long table turned to me. Into that silence, Philip said one more thing quietly, to me alone, though the whole yard heard it. There's a detective in town named Alvarez, Grandma. I showed him the threat on Friday. Hypothetically, he says, what's on that phone is extortion, plain as print, but the demands were made to you. So the complaint is yours. Your phone, your name, your signature. I won't sign it for you, and I won't push you either way. Nobody should ever get to make this choice for a mother. My grandson, protecting my right to choose my own heartbreak. That was the moment I finally stopped being afraid. I stood up. My knees ocked. My hands did not shake. And I looked down the length of the table I'd fed for 40 years. At my son, who was legally my son and had never once sent me a bill, and then at my daughter, who had never once sent me anything else. Mildred, I said, the night you left, you told me a baby is a bill you'll pay forever. I've thought about that sentence for 25 years. You were wrong about him. He was never the bill. You were. Her mouth opened. I wasn't finished. There's a bank account in this town you never knew about. I opened it the year the adoption was final, and I fed it for 24 years. Every spare 20 I had for the day you came home ready to be a person, it was yours, and you never had to threaten anyone. You just had to come home honest. I took a breath, and the maple moved, and the little light swung. I closed it this morning, and in the morning I'll be at the police station, and I will sign the complaint. Then the last of it, the part that cost what it cost. You said you'd disappear forever and I'd die wondering. Sweetheart, I've been dying wondering since the morning you left. At least now I'll know where the grave is. You should go now. She went. No screaming, no thrown glass. I think the performer in her knew the house was empty, that there wasn't a soul left at that table holding a ticket. She gathered her purse and walked the whole gauntlet of string lights and silent relatives with her chin up, and I'll grant my daughter this. She walked it steady. At the garden gate, she stopped. She didn't turn around. "Tell him the yellow blanket was mine first," she said to the dark past the fence. And then she was gone. And that sentence is the truest thing she said all summer. And I expect it to visit me at 2 in the morning for the rest of my life. Nobody clapped. Thank God nobody clapped. This wasn't that kind of story. And ours isn't that kind of family. Emily came and put both arms around me. Frank gathered the papers off the table slowly, tapping them square like putting away good tools. Monday morning at 9, Frank drove me to the Hartwell police station, and Detective Alvarez, younger than my grandson, patient as a Sunday, walked me through the complaint one page at a time. When he slid it across the desk, I thought about the last document that mattered this much in my family. Her round, tidy signature, 24 years ago, signing away a baby boy. 2 signatures, bookends on a shelf of 25 years. Hers gave him up. Mine kept him safe. I signed my name steady and cold and certain. And if you've been with me since the beginning of this story, you know exactly which hands I mean. Here's how it settled, because you deserve the ledger. Faced with her own texts, the counterfeit letterhead, which interested Harmon and Price very much, and Ruth Delgado's letters, Mildred took a plea that winter, attempted extortion, probation, and a no-contact order covering all 3 of us, and she left Ohio for good. Broken Cradles never aired the episode. A guilty plea in a public docket is poison to a program built on one-sided weeping, and they dropped her without so much as a correction. The town came most of the way back. Casseroles reappeared on the porch like migrating birds, and the pastor's wife looked me in the eye again. And a few people never did quit whispering that we'd had our own daughter arrested. Her own mother, they say in the same tone they once said, "What did they do to make her run? You can't fix that." The story that blood is owed everything is older than Hartwell. And it'll outlive me. And all a woman can do is stop paying into it. Carol showed up with a pie and an apology and stayed to wash dishes, which in our family is a peace treaty with signatures. Frank's follow-up came back clean. His doctor told him, whatever stress we'd subtracted, keep subtracting it. And Frank said, "Done, she's on probation." And I cried exactly once alone. The day the no-contact order arrived. Not for the woman at the garden gate, for a girl with bangs I trimmed in my kitchen. The girl I finally formally buried that Sunday. You're allowed to grieve someone who's still alive. Nobody tells you that. I'm telling you. The wedding came 2 weeks after that dinner. Same backyard, same string lights. But oh, it was a different garden. Philip married Emily under the maple on the 2nd Saturday of September, and the corn was in, and the light came down gold through the leaves. And not one chair sat empty, because we hadn't set one for absence. We set the table for the people who show up. It turns out that's the whole secret, and it took me 65 years to learn it. Late in the evening, the DJ played something slow, and Philip crossed the yard in his good suit and held out his hand to me, the way Frank did in 1979. We danced under the lights, his grandfather strung, and partway through, my grandson bent down and put his forehead against mine and said, "Quiet just for us. You're the one who stayed." Same words as the 7-year-old in the hallway, same boy. As for the $17,000, it didn't stay closed long. That money had spent 24 years learning to wait for somebody, so we gave it somebody. It opened a little fund at First Methodist, administered by Pastor Neil, for grandparents in the county who are raising their grandchildren and coming up short on school shoes and formula. Carol does the paperwork. Frank calls it the state fund, and the name went through the church board unanimous, and I cry a little every time someone says it out loud, which is fine. Some bills you pay forever. Gladly. If you take one thing from my story, take this. Family is not a debt that blood collects. It's a thing built every ordinary morning by whoever stays. And you are allowed to grieve a living person, close a door with love still in your hands, and keep your whole heart for the people who never once sent you a bill. That's my story. 2 signatures, 1 blue passbook, 25 years. If you're the one who stayed for a grandchild, a sister, a neighbor, then somewhere to someone, you are the whole family. And I hope you heard yourself in this. Tell me your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it tonight, and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. Thank you for sitting at my table. I'll see you in the next.